Story 1. I downloaded Duolingo as a random New Year's resolution to learn Italian. I became really into it, started watching Italian movies, and joined language exchange groups. Now, I am living in Florence and running my own tourism company, all because I was bored on January 1st. Story 2. I added voices to a couple of cats for fun late at night when I was supposed to be finishing a deadline. The Talking Animals YouTube channel was born, and my entire way of life changed. Story 3. I missed a bus. That's it. I was supposed to go to a job interview for a position I didn't want that badly. The bus didn't show up on time. I got annoyed, said forget it, and went to a coffee shop instead. There, I ran into an old college friend I hadn't seen in years. We started talking, and it turned out she worked at a startup that was hiring. 2 weeks later, I was working there. 3 years later, we're married. I still think about that bus sometimes. Story 4. A questionable student in high school wanted to sell me $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. He explained it poorly, and I suspected it was a scam. It is worth approximately $290 million as of now. Story 5. I decided to take a different bus route home on a whim. I missed my usual bus, hopped on a random one, and ended up sitting next to a stranger who later became my business partner. That detour turned into a startup that is now my full-time job, all because I couldn't wait 10 minutes in the rain. Story 6. I was 22 years old and extremely depressed. I had just started remembering repressed memories of my childhood sexual abuse and had caught my girlfriend cheating on me with my childhood best friend. I felt completely done. One night, I went out alone, got very drunk, and returned home where I took every pill I had. I remember saying good night and I'm sorry to my dog before taking one last shot. That last shot made me very nauseous, and I began vomiting uncontrollably. Most of the pills I had taken came out as well, and then I passed out. Now, at 29, I wouldn't say I'm extremely happy, but I'm at least not suicidal anymore. I try to take it day by day and hope that one day I will finally know what it feels like to be happy. Story 7. My grandparents met because my grandfather covered a shift driving taxis for a friend who was sick. My grandmother waved at him as she was walking down the street, mistaking him for someone she knew, so he pulled over thinking she was hailing the cab. The rest is history. It's wild to think I wouldn't be alive if that friend hadn't been sick, if my grandfather hadn't covered his shift, if his driving had taken him somewhere else at that moment, or if my grandmother hadn't accidentally waved at a stranger. Story 8. I randomly downloaded Words with friends and played a game with a guy. We got married and had 2 kids. He was abusive, and now I am going through a divorce, all because I was matched with him in a game. Story 9. During a move, I had my choice narrowed down to 3 apartments. The one I chose turned out to be a block away from someone on my team at work. We didn't know each other well at the time. Same department, different teams. At some point, we discovered the proximity situation and made plans to hang out. To be honest, I thought we would just be friends. I didn't feel like we had a lot in common. I was very wrong and still very much in love almost 10 years later. We're married, have traveled the world, and even have a small body of creative work after collaborating on a few freelance projects together over the years. Story 10. I decided to wear a particular coat to breakfast with a friend. My friend commented that in that coat, I looked like I should be a student at a university she had never heard of. I asked her which university that was, and she explained it was a progressive university known for languages and a high number of foreign students, allowing students to meet people from all over the world. After our conversation, I researched the university and ended up pursuing my degree there. Completely changed my life. Story 11. I took a challenging job parking cars at a hospital during the summer while I was a ski enthusiast in Colorado. I transitioned into registration, finance, then the laboratory, followed by emergency medical technician work, oncology, and finally information technology, all at that same hospital. This experience greatly influenced my 20s and 30s. I met my wife there, made many friends and connections, and am now a consultant with the firm the hospital hired to address a security breach. Story 12. I supported my friend whose ex passed away. She called me when he died, and I immediately felt the urge to go to her. We were inseparable for the following month. That day, I met the roommate of our friend who passed, and he is now my husband. If I hadn't answered the phone or had taken a distant approach, my entire life would be different right now. Story 13. Dad bought me Phantasy Star 4 for my birthday in Japanese. He asked if I wanted to return it, but I told him it was okay. I would figure it out. I managed to make sense of the language using a manual method, matching katakana characters to English phonemes, and cross-checking with an old game guide. The internet wasn't as big or accessible back then. Fast forward to now. That little head start eventually led to a scholarship offer from the Japanese government. I've been here for a long time, settled with my family. Story 14. I spoke to the new colleague at work. 22 years later, our son just celebrated his 21st birthday, and our 16th wedding anniversary is in September. We are currently on a weekend getaway in one of my favorite cities. Story 15. I decided to switch my usual coffee shop one morning because my regular place was packed. I met my husband of 12 years when I accidentally spilled my latte all over his white shirt. He still teases me about owing him a new one. Story 16. I stopped dating the life of the party. Days later, he was arrested for drug dealing in a buy-bust operation where we usually had our dates. Talk about a dodged bullet. Story 17. I was uncertain about attending a conference in my field 6 years ago. I was in a dark place personally at the time. I ended up going only because I was up for election to a leadership role in the organization. During a brief break, I happened to connect with the woman who is now my wife, the love of my life and my best friend. Truly changed my life. Story 18. I brought my coworker a bottle of Dayquil 4 years ago because she had the flu. We will have been married for 2 years on the 10th of April. Story 19. I almost swiped left on a guy with a beard on Tinder because I didn't like beards. I thought I was being a bit picky and I would never know if he was my soulmate. Turns out he was. He ended up getting a good job that requires him to shave anyway. Story 20. I sold a guy a puppy, one of 7, and we have been best friends for about 10 years now. I offered to take a sofa to a dog shelter for my ex, and we will be married soon. Story 21. At 19 years old, I went to hang out with a friend on a whim one day. She had another friend over and he asked for my number. I decided, sure, why not? I have been with him for 13 years and married for almost 7. It was the best spontaneous decision I have ever made. Story 22. I decided that the trendy bar my friends persuaded me to go to was too busy, so I left and went to the music club I usually visit. I met a girl who wasn't British, and now I'm married with 4 kids and living in a different country. Story 23. I got lost and asked a girl for directions. 11 years and 3 children later, I would say the entire course of my life was changed. Story 24. I told my mom I was having troubling thoughts. I was 27, living in her basement. My girlfriend had just cheated on me and left, breaking our lease, so I had to move home. I had failed to secure a promotion at work twice. She connected me with a recruiter who helped me land a contracting job. I did that for 3 months and the company I worked for hired me full-time. That was 10 years ago. I now have a wife, 3 wonderful kids, a nice house with a beautiful pool, a great career, and many wonderful memories since then. I spoke up and had the right support system to help me out of my slump. My main point is there's nothing wrong with asking for help and admitting you're struggling. Someone will listen. Story 25. I said, yes, when my boss asked if I could teach music. Now, I am being asked to help review the curriculum Present Professional Learning, and I have won awards for my teaching. Story 26. I decided to finally go to the doctor after putting it off. Turns out I have epilepsy. As a result, I am unable to drive. My contract was not renewed because the job required driving, and I was immediately evicted from staff housing since I was no longer staff. I had nothing to stay for in 2021, so I ended up moving to Bangkok and stayed for years until I had stretched my visa as far as it would go. I lived like a queen in a trendy neighborhood with a rooftop infinity pool and spa treatments every day, including massages for $10 and microdermabrasion facials for $15. I worked out of my condominium building with wealthy international families seeking college admission advice. Now my resume has the opposite of a gap, which could have been a disaster on top of all the other ones. Story 27. I auditioned for a show but didn't get a part, so I agreed to be a stage manager instead. I disliked stage managing and wasn't very skilled at it, but it brought me back into theater where I met some of my best friends. This experience absolutely changed my life for the better. Story 28. I agreed to participate in a joint interview with a college student. I was eager to make new friends, and he introduced me to his friend group, where I eventually met my husband. Story 29. I agreed to cover maternity leave at an information technology company. I didn't know much about the industry, but the interviewer convinced me I would be fine. I ended up at the board level. Story 30. A coworker was encouraging me to go to a street festival after work, when all I wanted to do was go home. I relented and decided to go, and I ended up meeting my future wife that night. It has been 30 years of wedded bliss, and I owe it all to my coworker's encouragement. Story 31. I cried at the wrong moment. My mother's employer called Child Protective Services on her for having a baby at work. They took me away because she was only 16. They gave me to my grandmother, who sold me to an adoption agency and never told my mother until her deathbed. My mother's daughter, my sister, tracked me down 29 years later. Story 32. I went to school for a specific career and decided to go wherever I needed to post-graduation to work in that role instead of staying in an urban area and working my way up. I planned to go somewhere remote for a year or so and then return to the city. I ended up in a very rural place, a village with a population of about 1,000. It has been 16 years now. I own a house, still work the same job I studied for, and run 2 small businesses on the side. I have had more opportunities and experiences than I could have ever imagined. I found an amazing partner. An extra bonus is that it is still a low-cost living area, so I am not feeling the impact of inflation as hard as my friends in the city. Story 33. I swiped my thumb on someone I thought was adorable, and 4 years later, I am still with the love of my life. Story 34. I quit my job during my lunch break and went to the mall instead. I ended up applying and getting hired at a jewelry store there. Across the hall was a guy I kept flirting with, and he eventually came over and asked for my number. 17 years later, we're married with 2 kids. Story 35. I swiped right. Today, I am married with children, and my life is completely different and better than it was before. Story 36. I posted my resume online to see what would happen. I am now waiting for the start date of my new job, which pays $25,000 more. I will be debt-free and will look into buying my first home in a few months. Story 37. Thank you for the message wishing me a happy new year. I appreciate it. Story 38. I let my best friend and his girlfriend move into my spare room while they were between homes. It's not a big deal. I've done that for a few friends over the years. He turned out to be abusive, so I cut him out of my life entirely. However, the girlfriend and I are getting married next year. To clarify, we didn't get together in any way until a couple of years after she left him. Story 39. My friend encouraged me to leave my slump and attend a going-away party for a mutual friend. I had no intention of going, but I decided to change my mind and re-enter the world. That night, I met my now husband and daughter. Story 40. What you do not realize is that every decision, from the most trivial to the most critical, changes the entire course of your life. Because it is not obvious, you often do not see it. That street you crossed this morning, just 2 seconds later, you could have been killed. That sideways glance while you were checking for traffic, you missed seeing the person of your dreams passing by just 5 feet away. Your beautiful child? If you had not been in the mood one night 9 months before their conception, they might never have been born and would certainly have been a completely different person. I could go on. You understand the idea. It is easy to trace backward in hindsight, but we will never know about the infinite possible paths our lives could have taken. Story 41. I joined a dating website with 2 friends. They took pictures of me and helped me write my profile. I didn't believe for a second that it would bring anything significantly meaningful to my life. It was an exercise to get out of my shell and comfort zone at 25. It changed my entire life quickly. This happened in 2014. I am not giving this as advice, as I know every online dating situation is vastly different. Story 42. I decided to draw on a random man's hand while he was sleeping. That man is now my husband. Story 43. Years ago, I decided to grab coffee at a different cafe one morning. A small choice that led me to meet my future spouse and completely reshape my life. Story 44. I was bored and responded to a post on an anonymous messaging board where a newly moved-in person was looking for people who liked beer and music. I met him in a park 2 days later. We had some beers and talked about the music we liked. 5 years later, he and his foreign fiancée are both my best friends. I will have the honor of being his best man at their wedding, and I have been to places and experienced things I never would have dreamed of. Story 45. I switched to an alternative high school in 11th grade and graduated there, coasting through to probably get a general educational development certificate. I also had a job and participated in work release. One day, while working, we got rained out, and I was let go early for the day. I decided to visit my old friends at my original high school. I wasn't supposed to be there and was asked to leave. I created a story about how I was really there to talk about transferring back to that school, completely fabricated in the moment. When lunch ended, I said goodbye to all my friends and started leaving when a gentleman introduced himself and said, "Let's go talk in my office." He was a school counselor and we sat down. He explained everything I would have to do to get caught up and transfer back to obtain my original high school diploma. I returned to my alternative high school, worked hard, and caught up on all my credits. I transferred back for the last half of 12th grade and received my diploma alongside all the friends I grew up with. I still think about this often and realize how completely random it was for me and how much that one day and that one decision changed my entire trajectory in life. Story 46. I had 2 job offers in April 2001, one at the World Trade Center and one elsewhere. I took the job that was not in the World Trade Center, which saved my life. Story 47. I tried to sneak into the Red Sox game on April 15, 2013. It didn't work out, so my friends and I walked over to the marathon finish line as we had originally planned. We were less than a quarter of a mile away when we heard the Boston Marathon bombs go off. If we hadn't attempted to go to the game, we would have been right at the finish line. Story 48. I took a French course at university because the person I liked was a French major and a French speaker. We have been married for 10 years and are raising our 2 children to be trilingual. I currently teach high school French and Spanish. Story 49. I was driving home from work along my usual route when I decided to take a detour of 2 blocks to stop at a store I rarely visit. A drunk driver ran a red light, traveling at 60 miles per hour, and collided with my car on the passenger side. As a result, I sustained 4 fractures in my neck. Story 50. I moved into the dorms a week early. Sitting in my room with the door open, I was playing real-time strategy games on my PC. A guy wandered past in the hallway, poked his head in, and said, "Hey, do you want to go play air hockey in the basement?" "Why not?" He invited me to a Dungeons and Dragons session he was running with some other people he had gathered. And through one of those guys, I met all of my college friends and eventually my wife due to where we all ended up living. After my first semester of college, the original air hockey guy disappeared, and I haven't heard from him in 17 years. Story 51. I went to the first day of university with my then boyfriend and best friend just to hang out. I enrolled the week after, and 5 years later, I graduated. Now I have a degree that allows me to do everything in general but nothing in particular, and I don't know how to feel about that. Story 52. Deciding to play VR chat. I am now living across the country with someone I met years ago. I still talk to my international friend group, and we play Dungeons and Dragons now. Life is much better than before I started playing that game. Story 53. When I was traveling in Australia, I convinced my parents to join me for a while. We went to the Galapagos Islands. On the boat, I met my future wife, who is now happily living in Denmark with our 2 children. It was such a random encounter. Story 54. I decided to check my dating app after not using it for months. Shortly after opening it, I received a message. For years later, I am happily married to the person I love. Had I not opened it, I can't even imagine where I would be now. Story 55. My New Year's Eve travel plans were canceled, so I ended up going to a low-key party at a friend's house. I met a girl and we kissed at midnight. Now we are happily married with a 3-year-old daughter. Story 56. I was getting off my shift when a colleague missed her bus and was about to walk home alone. I accompanied her because I had nothing else to do. 15 years later, she is the mother of my 2 children and has been married for 6 years. All because I had a free evening. Story 57. I randomly followed someone on Twitter about 8 years ago, and they followed me back. 4 years later, they connected me to my new career. My life is radically different and better. Story 58. I was working in another state and would commute back to my children every 2 weeks. After being divorced for a few years and dating a bit, I was unsuccessful in finding someone with whom I could connect. I looked for matches in both states, resetting my location to see who was out there and adjusting my range. One evening, I adjusted my search settings and accidentally expanded my range using the name of the town where I was working, but in the state where I resided. It turned out there was a town with the same name on the other end of the state, and I got matched with someone who caught my eye. We talked for about a month and then met. It's been almost 8 years now that we've been together, and I feel like I've finally met my forever match. Story 59. I attended a career technical school for my last 2 years of high school, where I met my now wife. It has been 7 years and counting. Story 60. The Chinese call it yuanfan, roughly translated to predestined fate. Mine goes like this. I got high and decided not to do a report for my political science university course. I failed the course and dropped out of university. Because I dropped out, I went to college instead. I met a friend in college who took me to a bar one night where I met my first wife, a friend of my friend. When I was laid off, my first wife helped me get a new job working with my then brother-in-law. Through that job, my supervisor recommended me for a better job. I worked that better job when I got divorced. A coworker from my better job pushed me back into the dating scene. I met my current wife through a dating app that same day. With my new wife, I bought a new house and have a new life in a happier marriage. All because I got high. Story 61. I agreed to meet the friend of a married couple. The husband showed great excitement when his wife mentioned it while we were hanging out together. A few years later, he served as the best man at my wedding and that of Mr. Wine and Dogs 2020. Story 62. I broke up with my girlfriend a year after moving to her country and mentioned the idea of moving back at some point. I went out for a few beers, where I struck up a conversation with a woman I eventually got engaged to. She left me a few months ago, but those 4 years made me feel at home here. If I hadn't gone for those beers that night, I likely wouldn't be here. Story 63. My position was eliminated, and I was given the option of 2 different positions in 2 different departments, 2 hours from home. I am now married to my husband of 25 years because someone else in our department was getting married 2 weeks after I started. And my now husband invited me as his plus one, so I wouldn't feel left out. Story 64. I dismissed my mom's symptoms, telling her she was okay and probably exaggerating her condition. She passed away within a few years. Story 65. I downloaded a relatively unknown app called Tinder in early 2013, and I, a 24-year-old male, swiped right on a girl, a 21-year-old female, who was home from college for the summer. I thought it would be fun to hang out occasionally until she went back to school. We just celebrated our 5-year wedding anniversary last month. Story 66. My brother was in town and asked me to stay at my parents' house with him that night to play video games. I told him I was too tired and that we would do it the next day, so I went home, which is only a short distance away. The next day, he had a really bad headache and decided to leave early to get to his place and rest. He was in a terrible car accident and we lost him. Not a single day passes that I don't think about how things might be different if I had just stayed and played games with him. Story 67. I saw a family dog itching his ears repeatedly every 10 minutes. I decided to bring him home from my aunt's house to get his ear treated. He never returned and stayed with me for 6 more years. That's how my soul dog found me, healed me, and changed me. Now, I carry him in my heart 4 years after his passing. Story 68. I teamed up with a random player in Titanfall 2 and decided to become friends with them. Now, I have some of the greatest friends I'll ever have. Story 69. Being a resident of your family home causes you stress due to their numerous problems. The idea of staying with the family may seem simple to some, but it is very stressful for me. Story 70. I accepted a pre-high school graduation scholarship to a college during the summer between my junior and senior years. I attended a small rural school and had done no planning for college. I have no idea how they found me or the other few people who were invited. The scholarship offered a full summer course load for free, with dorms available for pay. I ended up going to that college since I was essentially already admitted. Without that opportunity, I probably would have attended a small college not far from the tiny town where I grew up, which would have led me down a very different path. The college I attended was a real university. It wasn't just locals. I met people from all over and made some of my best friends. This network allowed me to move to another city across the state. Story 71. I had my gallbladder removed. Instead of taking 2 weeks off and returning to work as usual, I experienced a rare complication that nearly took my life. It required 16 additional surgeries and 1.5 years to mostly recover from. However, my life feels ruined. Story 72. I am of the age before Tinder. It did not exist when I swiped right. We were using old-fashioned Match.com. Similar but different. Story 73. I took my roommate's girlfriend to the semi-formal school dance. I had an extra ticket, and she had a boyfriend who was not very supportive. It was a last-minute decision for both of us. I have been happily married for over 40 years now. Story 74. I started speedrunning video games in 2008 when I was 13 because I was attacked by a dog and needed an indoor hobby. I have since turned it into a career testing video games. The butterfly effect is real. Everything affects everything. Story 75. Moving from residence to a rental between the first and second year of university, I almost ended up living in a house with serious varsity athletes while I was casually on a team in an unrelated sport. I probably would have improved my game and athleticism. They needed 2 people and I had a friend lined up to join me, but he backed out at the last minute, so I had to find somewhere else to live. I ended up at a house with heavy drug users instead. I became involved in selling marijuana, as it was the only way I could afford it, but I got caught a couple of years later. It took a decade to rebuild my life, and I will never be able to travel to the United States. Story 76. I attended an open improvisation rehearsal as a volunteer 10 years ago, and now I am the executive director of that same nonprofit community theater. Story 77. I was working on some stand-up when my roommate invited me to check out a venue where he was about to perform. I tested my material on the roadies while they were taking a break, and a few minutes later they were laughing uncontrollably. One of them, the multimedia director of a local studio, asked if I wanted a job and hired me as his assistant. I quit my position at a home improvement store and learned how to shoot and produce commercials. 20 years later, I have produced advertisements for major retailers, space agencies, and gaming startups. Story 78. I took a random business course in high school because it counted for college credit. It was an accounting course, and I didn't even know what type of job someone with an accounting background could have. I was originally set to go to college to become a teacher, but I changed my focus to accounting, and I still work in accounting now. Story 79. Going for a walk has become addictive, and I keep challenging myself. I am in better shape than I have ever been. I just came home from a 30-kilometer walk. Story 80. Love your kindness and energy. I appreciate this discussion. There are such amazing stories of existence. Mine is funny. I was ending my first marriage of 2 years, feeling disillusioned and unable to focus on work. Very unlike me, I quit a management position in hospitality and decided to go on a camping road trip with my 2 dogs. My wife had left me, and I was also being evicted due to her leaving her job, which provided housing. I traveled for 5 months, spent my limited savings, and returned to where I grew up. I ended up in San Francisco, which brought me closer to my parents and sister than ever before, both physically and emotionally. A former professional acquaintance encouraged me to help develop a historic military base into a $100 million resort, which advanced my career. While working on the project, I met my current wife and we have been married for 15 years, together for 17. I have rehabilitated multiple historic inns, resorts, and lodges, managed beautiful hotels, and have had a fortunate and privileged life traveling the world with my partner to learn more about hospitality design and management. We live in a stunning location with great views, enjoy wonderful dogs, cook together, and lead a simple life. All because I decided to go camping on a whim. Story 81. I learned to code in the early 1980s, which absolutely changed my career trajectory. I took a year off from college, moved to Durango, and met my wife. Story 82. I went to give a presentation for work, but had the wrong time. After realizing my mistake, I left that building to head back to my office across campus. I ended up getting crushed under a delivery truck that was backing up without a warning signal. Did you know you can't hear the crunch of tires on a brick sidewalk? Now you know. My leg and hip were crushed, and my lower back was twisted. I developed a debilitating pain condition known as chronic regional pain syndrome, often referred to as the suicide disease. Completely ruined my life and my plans. I haven't been able to work, study, or travel the world as I had wanted. However, it did show me how amazing my partner, my mom, and my closest friends are. I still dislike walking or riding in a car near delivery trucks, and I continue to walk with a cane. If only I hadn't put that meeting in my calendar incorrectly. If only I had left a few minutes earlier or later. Story 83. I left Florida to move in with my father, who wanted a second chance at being a parent, and he lived in Illinois. The first month was really hard, and my mother asked if I wanted to come back. I desperately wanted to say yes, but I decided to stick it out. Less than 3 years later, I met my husband, who was also a Florida native that moved to Illinois to give his mother a second chance. We are celebrating 9 years together this year with our 8-year-old son, and we ended up moving to my hometown shortly after we met. My father remained abusive, and I haven't talked to him in over 5 years. However, if I hadn't decided to give him a second chance and stayed for a bit, I would never have met my amazing husband, and our son would not exist. Story 84. Not my story, but my parents. My dad was in the army stationed in Georgia at the time. He was sitting near the phone when it started ringing. He wasn't expecting a call, but decided to answer anyway. It was my mom, who was calling to talk to her longtime friend. My parents ended up talking for hours. He never even told her friend that she had called. After many phone calls lasting hours and meeting in person twice, she lived in South Dakota. They married, I think, 9 months later. Fast forward 33 years, 10 kids, for foster kids, and for grandkids later, and they're still as happily in love as they were on the day of that fateful phone call. Story 85. Checking one simple checkbox instead of another resulted in ordering the long-form transcript of my taxes instead of the short form. This extra delay cost us an opportunity to adopt 2 months later, but our subsequent response led us to adopt children from foster care. I cannot imagine having better children for our family. Story 86. I was on a dating app and would normally swipe left on guys who listed smoked pot in their profile. As I grew up hearing it was very bad. Somehow, I missed that note when I swiped right on this guy's profile. We have now been married for nearly 2 years. I was definitely naive about how pot works. He has opened my eyes, and I love him so much. Story 87. I visited Paris on a whim and decided to finish my undergraduate degree there. Now, I live here permanently and am married to a French man. Story 88. I visited a friend who had just gotten a new haircut. She wanted to go to a party to show it off, so I decided to join her. I met my husband of over 20 years. I was very glad I went to that party. Story 89. I skipped work to prepare for a wedding in the afternoon. Earlier that day, I met the love of my life because he was covering someone else's route. Story 90. Not me, but a friend's mother. Before she got married, she worked as a nurse in a hospital. After finishing a late shift, she was waiting for the bus home when a man and his wife pulled up in a car and offered her a lift to save her from waiting in the rain. She was about to accept when she saw the bus coming, so she thanked them but declined the offer and boarded the bus instead. The couple were Fred and Rosemary West. Story 91. Changed servers in World of Warcraft. I met the love of my life, and we just celebrated 15 years together. Story 92. I got a job at the climbing wall in college just to have something to do. I wasn't that interested in climbing, but it led me to change my major to parks and recreation, which I didn't even know my school offered. There, I met my current girlfriend. I moved to a new city to be with her and found my dream job as an outdoor preschool teacher. I had no idea I wanted to do that, but it unexpectedly came my way, and I love it. My professor in Parks and Recreation is the one who started the climbing wall while he was in college, so I truly have him to thank for my entire life trajectory after college. One decision he made changed my life completely. Story 93. Going to a party knowing just one person, the one who invited me spontaneously. I met a girl an hour later. 1 week later, I met her again. A month later, we were together. 20 years later, I have 2 kids, a dog, a house, and a soulmate. Story 94. I swiped right on Tinder. We are not together anymore, but we moved to a different country together, traveled a lot, and experienced many new things. I climbed the corporate ladder, gained a lot of confidence, and feel more like myself. This probably would not have happened in my country of origin due to a lack of opportunities and cultural differences, and it would not have been possible in the new country without that Tinder match. Story 95. I didn't hug my dad. My dad had a recently acquired, very controlling girlfriend. He was also dying from mesothelioma, a cancer that makes having your back or torso squeezed very painful. So I didn't hug my dad at the end of visiting him, and his girlfriend, who had moved in with him for pure love, took that to mean we were not close. She shut out my sister, who did hug dad, and let me hang around him, even when she wasn't there. It turned out that girlfriend was trying to get all of dad's money and tried to be named the executor of his will. It didn't work, mostly because dad and I were close. He spent time in his final months explaining his will to me and going over all his finances. I had been named his executor years before. Dad died faster than his girlfriend had anticipated. She got nothing except the money she persuaded him to give and the proceeds of one forged check, over $30,000, but still very little compared to his estate. A few hugs could have cost me and my siblings everything that our dad had worked so hard to leave us. Why did we trust the girlfriend? She was 91 years old and very believable as a warm, nurturing person. She fooled everyone. 1 week after Dad's death, she was already looking for a new boyfriend in their retirement home. Story 96. I joined a social media group for memes in 2014. I was recommended a user who was part of that group. I decided to add him and he accepted. We started messaging and the rest is history. I moved from one coast to another 4 years later, and we have lived together for 8 years. I can't imagine a different life, all thanks to a meme group on social media. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.